You don't have superhuman powers. And even if you did, you can't scale beyond your limit of how many hours you have in a day. And by the way, remember the reason you started the business, which is to have hours outside of the business, empowering the people that are working for us and delegating effectively and starting to stand back and become more of the CEO of the business. That's a huge area that holds people back from being able to grow a business. We can end up with this decision fatigue, because if we have to make every single little decision, that's exhausting as a business owner.
Welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast, where you can escape the corporate trap through franchise ownership. Here's your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, the Franchise Guide.
Okay, and welcome back to the Franchise Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, your franchise guide, and we have part 2 of our series with my good friend, Henry Lopez. We're going to be talking about existing business ownership and what to look for. So, Henry, thanks for coming back on the show.
It feels like ages since we've spoken.
Been a whole 5 minutes. So we had some technical issues, so we're past that. We got the right mics on, so hopefully audio quality is much better. But I appreciate it. So wanted to dive in. So we focused episode 1. We talked about what to look for, advice, for new business owners. So let's talk about someone that actually made the leap. They invested in the franchise or the startup or whatever the case may be. They're in business several months. What are things to look for? You reference on the first show, EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System. What are some things initially that kind of stand out that business owners should be aware of?
If I think of foundationally fundamentals, there's that initial stage where we're just trying to get to break even, right? Not just trying, we're trying to get to break even. And that's the goal. It's that startup phase. And for most small business owners, that hopefully happens within the first 12 months, maybe within the 6 months. Every business is different, somewhere in there. Once we get past that and we survive that, fantastic. Now we get into really running the business and growing the business, scaling it over time. So there's 2 big things that come into play, 2 big impediments that I see that we can talk about. One is us getting out of our own way. Now, there are exceptions. There are businesses where you will continue as a solopreneur for, forever, perhaps. Maybe you want to be it that way. Maybe, a CPA who just wants to practice he or she by themselves, or a bookkeeper or an electrician or whatever. Nothing wrong with that. But for most of us as small business owners, we talked about in the first episode about that independence, being able to have time. Well, if we don't bring on a team of people over time when we can afford to, then we won't have any time. And this will just become a worse, lower paying job than the one we had, right? In fact, we might not be able to get out of this one if we've signed a lease, for example. So it's beginning to bring on other people, developing our teams, empowering the people that are working for us, and delegating effectively and starting to stand back and become more of the CEO of the business. That's a huge area that holds people back from being able to grow a business.
And that's a very good point, because I don't think people know where to start. And I always say, look for ways to automate, look for ways where employees could take things off your plate. Ultimately, you want to be working on the business, and you hear these terms on versus in the business. And first year you're in that business on the learning the ins and outs, which is invaluable, right? You're learning the business, how everything operates, but working on the business, you're taking that step back, as you said, and kind of saying, okay, where are the issues? Where are the opportunities? Where are the things we can, you need to fix immediately? Because once you're in the business, in the day-to-day, dealing with just about everything, it's hard, to really, start thinking about, big picture topics when you're, trying to fix all these little issues. So
absolutely.
Is that, that's how I look at it, but wanted to get your thoughts there.
It ties back to what we talked about the previous episode about decision-making. Well, we can end up with this decision fatigue, because if we have to make every single little decision, that's exhausting as a business owner. And it's a good sign if you find yourself there, you're a year into the business, 2 years into the business, and you feel like every single thing still has to go through you. You have to look at yourself, because you have created that situation, whether we want to admit it or not. Now, I get it. Initially, to your point, Giuseppe, we needed to be involved in everything. We must learn everything. especially if it's just us. If we have a partner, then maybe we can divvy things up.
Right.
But very quickly, we have got to start empowering our team to make some of those decisions. You're going to give them guidelines. You're going to give them parameters within which they are empowered, right? I'm probably not going to give my manager the opportunity to sign the extension on the lease. I'm going to handle that, or to encumber us to $100,000 commitment. But within their realm, within what I've hired them to do, let them make their decisions. Empower them to make decisions. That's the only way it scales. You cannot, if you're going to grow a business, still be the one that makes all of the decisions.
And that's a great point, because when people ask me what was the biggest mistake, it was that mistake. I was a bottleneck in my own business. I had a general manager that needed to clear everything by me, and I said, well, this person not only has more experience in this industry, they're more than competent. They have the experience. They probably could make better decisions, since that's going to be their main focus. Like to your point, some big heavy level stuff. Do we need to expand and purchase another territory with the franchise, or if something legally came up, that's something that fell on my plate. But
absolutely.
Don't be that bottleneck.
Or a new policy or a new procedure. But you make a great point there. And I really learned this from my business partner, David Begin. He helped me to understand that. Well, here's the thing that we come to understand. Are you the best at it? Probably, maybe so, especially early on. You are, but that's not the point. That's not the point. If you continue to be the best at everything in your business, you don't have a business. Again, you just have a job that probably isn't paying you very well. Right? But the surprise is that we go into it feeling like, okay, I'm going to delegate this to Giuseppe. He's my manager. He'll make 80% as good of decisions that I will. But then over time, what will happen, and maybe even in a shorter period of time than I might think, is Giuseppe is going to be able to make a decision or do something that I would not have been able to do, either because he brings his experiences and background, or he's focused on that particular area of the business. So he's actually going to become better at it if I'll just allow him an opportunity to do so.
Yes.
So that getting in the way of the business, not delegating, not empowering our team, that is one of the biggest things that I see that holds back small business owners from being able to scale their business.
I agree. One other piece that I would add to that is that when you empower that employee, like we have in our businesses, you have to support them.
That's right.
So so there was a couple things. Number one is we met at bare minimum a couple hours every Wednesday. We had an office meeting. An hour of that would be with my general manager. And I said, whatever decision you make was the correct decision. I support you 1,000%. With that being said, if this comes up, maybe there's some ways I would approach it differently. So you need to be supportive. But secondly, I was setting them up in many cases for failure in making incorrect decisions. And people are like, well, why would you even say that? It's for a manager, for that key employee to make certain decisions, they have to have access.
Yeah.
So if they don't have access to your books, to the bookkeeping, financially, maybe business-wise, they make decision A, but then when they look at the financial effect on the business, it would have been option B. So giving them access to the financials. And what I did was I would give full access. We would do monthly profit and loss. But with that monthly profit and loss, I said, you know what, we're going to give you what we call phantom equity. I think I learned this from EOS and Gino Wickman's book, Traction. They got a cut of the profits, so that every decision they made, should we look to hire another employee? I don't know. How does it affect the bottom line?
Exactly.
And do we really need that employee? It's easy to say we need another employee, but if that's hurting, if we're now losing money, maybe that's not the best decision. So giving them access and then giving them rewards. Another mistake I did, annual, bonuses. That's the wrong approach. You got to do that quarterly. It's got to be consistent. People can't wait until the end of the year to cross their fingers on a bonus. So this is a big topic. I talk about this almost every single day with people, and definitely something to really consider. And as a business owner, and I want to talk about kind of roles and things like that, you start figuring out the roles that you enjoy. Maybe you do like a customer service aspect, and maybe that's not on the phone all day, but you're going out visiting one customer a week.
Exactly.
So talk to us about role. We want this business to be sustainable.
Yeah.
We don't want to get burnt out doing the things we don't enjoy doing. So what are your thoughts on sustainability of the business and just kind of your role in the business, when to start backing off and hiring maybe that general manager to replace you?
Sure. I mean, obviously, the financials have to dictate that, to the point that you alluded. I
Right.
have to be able to afford that. Although sometimes I have to look at it as an investment to bringing on people, right? Because sometimes if I keep waiting for the numbers to justify it, I might not get there. And yet it's an opportunity cost. If I did bring on this person and that freed me up to do what I love to do, which is to go sell, well, now I have an opportunity to go do that versus where I was bogged down delivering or taking care of whatever else. And if I hired that person and make that investment, then I can go do more of that I'm good at, which usually relates to what I enjoy doing, right? But specifically then furthermore on roles, Giuseppe, that's a key point about having clearly defined roles. This in particular comes into play when I have a partner or someone who's a senior leader, or I'm working with a spouse. Is often the case, as often might be the case with a franchise. Being very clear on who plays what role, what is the delineation, what am I responsible for, what are you responsible for? That helps even with an employee to help me from overstepping and allowing them what I hired them to do or what I've promoted them to do. So that's how I see roles. The more clearly defined you have a job description that delineates the roles. Now, at a higher level, we may not call it a job description. We might call it, the pillars within the company that I'm responsible for. Like, I'm going to be responsible for HR. You're going to be responsible for sales. Tony, who we hired, is going to be handling the making of the widgets, the operations, or manufacturing. It could be at that level, but it's very important to have those roles. And then I do want to come back to your point about transparency. There are some people who might be listening and say, "Oh God, I would never share my financials," and that's fine. There's different ways to do that. But to Giuseppe's point, if what I do need to provide to those individuals is visibility to the numbers or the KPIs that they can impact and that they're measured on. As long as I'm doing that, then I'm okay with the transparency. Yeah.
And on the finance, it doesn't, by the way, and just to interject, it doesn't have to be all the employees.
That's
it could just be the general manager.
Exactly.
So I get that. Yeah.
But going back to roles, the question about roles, that's how the cleaner you are. Where I have seen dysfunction, and I know you have as well, because that's why you brought this up, is in organizations where you ask, for example, just recently working with a client, and I asked him, who's doing sales? Oh, we both are. Well, how are you doing? Are you divvying it up? No, it just kind of depends. I know right away there's a problem, right? I know right away there's a problem. And probably, now these are two partners, it's probably because one doesn't want to give up that control, and sales are so critical in that early stage of landing those new clients. So I get that. So at a minimum there, what I have started to recommend to them is you divvy it up, If it's your lead that you've generated, then you're going to run with it. You're going to own that opportunity. And same thing for the other person. And you're going to meet on a regular basis to discuss what's in the pipeline, who's working what's going on, how can I help? But that role definition is very critical for all of those reasons.
Yes, it is. And write it down. This is not
absolutely.
I see partnerships there. We shook on it. We kind of understand our roles. No, I think the best thing, I have a whiteboard to my right here, and I would jot down, okay, these are the pillars, right? Of, you got bookkeeping, you got sales, you got marketing. And sometimes in the very beginning stages, you're wearing multiple hats, or maybe one employee is doing marketing and sales. That's fine initially, but writing down every role, and then figuring out later when you do hire that new employee that they're going to take over the marketing, or they're going to take over the sales, or that general manager is going to take on the onboarding of all new staff from you, but getting very specific. There's going to be always a little bit of overlap in the initial stages, but ultimately everyone kind of stays in their lane. Everyone knows who's responsible for what, and it just it prevents burnout, because if you're doing everything now, a lot of people feel like they're a one-man band. So
yeah, you burn out and you can't scale. You just can't do that. You can't. It's simply not possible. You can't. You're not. You don't have superhuman powers, and even if you did, you can't scale beyond your limit of how many hours you have in a day. Oh, and by the way, remember the reason you started the business, which is to
Right.
have hours outside of the business. So if the way you're going to address it is I'll just do that on Saturdays, I'll come in on Saturdays. Well, now, yes, sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes we have to make those sacrifices in business. But if that continues, then again, we don't really have a business that fits our life, right? A couple of things. You mentioned a couple of things, working on the business as opposed to in the business. Of course, that's in part from the most popular, the most recommended book on my podcast, which is The E-Myth, which I'm there. You may have it somewhere on your desk.
Yeah.
I know I have it here. Number one most popular book, definitely a recommendation. And we've mentioned EOS, and Traction is a great book for us as we're getting to that stage in our business where we need to implement systems. But it's also one of the great things that a franchise can provide. A good franchise has a lot of this already built for you, or they will help you with this. And that's huge. Yeah.
Yep.
A good franchise knows, all right, here's what you're going to need. After the initial sale, you're going to need a manager. Here's what their responsibilities are. So having somebody else that has helped you or has already built that, man, that's golden.
I agree. And here's a little secret. Doesn't help the franchise business, but it's the truth. And I like to give people all these insights. I have a lot of people stuck on their startup. They're looking at a franchise. Some of those people end up moving forward with the franchise and learning how to put systems in place to launch their startup. You're not stealing, or you're essentially copying the blueprint.
How to do it. Absolutely.
You're learning how to do it. Maybe it's a different CRM, but set up, follow up, best practices, marketing, and all that, and launching that. So just because you own a franchise or start with a startup or vice versa, you can scale, own different types of businesses. But that's what you're looking for, because
absolutely.
The part that's missing, and let me know if you agree here, is that we're talking about looking at owning a business, then obviously making the business more efficient. But we've sold businesses, so a business, no matter what amount of money you're making, if you go to sell a business and you're telling the buyer, yeah, I take home $500,000 a year, but I work 90 hours a week, I'm on call 24/7. The business can that business still sell? Yes. Mm-hmm. But what happens is that buyer is going to say, well, who do I need to put in place, or people I need to put in place to kind of take over that 90-hour a week? And they'll extremely cut back on the valuation of that business, because, really you're inflating, really the take home pay, because you're putting in all these hours. So that's right. I see that as well when you actually have the experience of selling a business. So, I always say, when do you start preparing to sell your business? And that's always day one. Day one. You want to be aware and put those systems in place. What else are we missing, or what else should people consider?
As far as running a business and those things,
with the end in mind to sell. And
I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, listen, this is something that if you, I've talked about this, and you have talked about it as well on your show. This is something that if you would ask people 20 years ago, it just wasn't a common topic.
Right.
I think we've become so much more enlightened now with the thinking that we must have an exit strategy in mind. I think it's because the thinking used to be perhaps that I'm going to start this business, I'm going to own it forever, I'm going to pass it to my kids. Right. And maybe that happens. That's great. But even if that's the plan, you need to have a plan for exit, because sometimes it's not a voluntary exit, right?
Right.
I mean, if something happens to me significantly health-wise, can somebody pick up the pieces, or is the business done? So what have I left for my family then, right? So if it's nothing more than succession planning, but to your point, if we start a business with an end in mind of some exit, we will build it such that we separate ourselves from it depending on us day to day. It's a level of owner independence that must be there, even if you never sell the business.
I love that. That's exactly right. And that's the thing. You don't have to sell the business per se. We're talking about kind of just planning and what to look for. But that's really it. That vehicle is something where it's not dependent on you. How do you, if it's dependent on you, how do you have time freedom when you can't travel because you're tied to the business? So,
and we see so many people like that, right? I know I see them.
Unfortunately,
they're 20 years, 30 years into the business, and their wives have come to accept it, or their family members they don't take long vacations. They can't. The business depends on them.
Right.
And so, okay, that's fine. It's paid the bills. It's great. That's fantastic. But boy, that's not what you want. I assure you, that's not what you want longer term. Yeah. You want to be able to have those abilities to spend time outside of the business, and think of it as that what we're building is an asset. This is an asset, but it's only an asset if I don't have to, be in it all the time. It becomes an asset when it starts producing for me in monetary ways as well as flexibility. And I don't have to be the one that makes the dough every morning. I don't have to be the one that makes the donuts every morning, right? And that's a lot of what Michael Gerber talks about in the E-Myth is sometimes, going back to the point about passion, we'll go into a business because we are the technician. We're passionate about making the donuts, if we continue with that analogy. And then what happens a lot of times to those people is they don't know how to let go of making the donuts. And so 20 years later, they're still the ones getting up at 4 a.m. to go make the darn donuts, right?
Reminds you of that those commercials.
That's right. That's right. That was the Dunkin' Donut commercial.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Back in the day, I still remember that. The guy with the mustache. Time to make the donuts.
Time to make the donuts. That's the way it was in the pizza business, right?
Oh, yeah.
We had to make dough every day without fail, right? Or we had no product to sell. Now, fortunately for me in that business, because I was the business partner, I took care of all of the other things. My business partner was in it day-to-day managing it. So he was the manager operator, if you will.
A lot of great stuff. And honestly, we could probably talk for hours on this. How can people reach you, and who is kind of the ideal person if they want some additional information, some help, whether they be kind of looking to start a business or in the business already? What's the best route?
Yeah, thank you. So thehowofbusiness.com is the place to go. So at thehowofbusiness.com, you'll find everything about me, including the podcast. So like Giuseppe, I have a free podcast as well. And so that's a resource for you that doesn't require any other obligation, just to listen and take action. Like when you listen to Giuseppe's episodes, right? I've had Giuseppe on my show several times. So that's there as a free resource. And then if you feel it's a fit, and I'm looking for people that I can work with who are coachable, who are willing to take input. It's not that you're going to do everything I say. That's not what a coach does anyway. A coach helps you ask the right questions. There's a certain level of accountability, but really I'm going to bring to bear my experiences in my own businesses and with my number of clients now that I've had in the hundreds, and bring that to bear to help you hopefully avoid some of the easy mistakes and to think through and decide on the challenges that you have. I help people who are looking to start a business, whether it's a franchise or not. I have a client right now who's starting a franchise, but still wanted that third party kind of neutral advice beyond what he's getting from the franchise. Very good franchise, so not a problem there. And then people who are starting their own thing, and then existing small business owners. And they're usually stuck in some of these things that we've talked about. Right. Letting go, scaling the business. Those are kind of the things. So if you're that person, small business owner, that's usually who I can help. And what I offer is a free coaching consultation, and you can find the link to do that at thehowofbusiness.com. Awesome.
Highly recommend speaking with Henry. Highly recommend the show. The show covers just about every topic. So check that out. Henry, it's been a pleasure. It's been too long. Looking forward to having you back on the show, and we'll definitely chat soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn how to make the transition from corporate to owning your franchise, join Giuseppe on the next episode. You can also follow on all social media platforms and achieve financial and time freedom today.